If there is one line we have been incessantly pounded over the head with every single day in this never-ending presidential election cycle, it's any variation on a theme as to how Americans are fed up with Washington and how Donald Trump is the leading Republican candidate because he's an outsider. It's all well and dandy. Let's be honest. People have always hated Washington, D.C. and anything emerging from the former swamp. So is it really any worse now, or is it just hate that's a fabrication and result of the overabundance of media coverage? And is Donald Trump really an outsider? Questions will pose. Welcome back, presidential historian, biographer of Ronald Reagan, who, unlike some, actually puts facts in his book. The latest entitled Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan, Craig Shirley. Craig, always a pleasure to talk to you. So let's start right there. Everybody says that we hate Washington, but does history tell us that we really hate it any more now than we have any time in the recent past?
No, I think we actually do hate it more now than we used to. You know, government generally worked as far as the American people were concerned. Government won the American Revolution. Government created the Constitution, or the Constitution created the government. But government generally worked. It won the Civil War. It engaged in Reconstruction, and even in the Great Depression, government was turned to for the WPA, the CCC camp. And of course, during the 1950s, it built the interstate highway system. 1940s, it defeated part of Japan, Nazi Germany, successfully fought the Cold War. It was only really, I think, the linchpin for our cynicism, our rejection, or our discussion about government began with JFK's assassination in 1963, which ironically was just past the anniversary. Government couldn't protect John Kennedy, and then government couldn't win the Vietnam War, and then government couldn't stop inflation and long gas lines. Jimmy Carter blamed the American people essentially for the problems that were created by the government. Reagan turned the argument on his head and said the government doesn't have the power, it's the American people who have the power, and that's where it belongs. But we've been more skeptical of government now since the Kennedy assassination, probably than at any other time in our history.
Let's talk about outsiders then. People talk about Donald Trump and they love him because he's an outsider. Actually, before the show, we sat back and thought for a minute about outsiders. And I'll be honest, I came up with Dwight Eisenhower, who had never held elected office, who basically was elected because he won World War II, or at least helped to. And Jimmy Carter was really an outsider as well, because outside of his election, nobody knew who this guy was. So what is it that makes Donald Trump then appealing as an outsider?
Well, it's because I was, and by the way, I think those are two excellent choices and ones that aren't normally thought of. You know, you remember Eisenhower in his farewell address took on the military-industrial complex, which solidified his position as actually an outsider to the Washington system. And of course, Carter ran as an outsider who was going to reform Washington and going to clean up the mess after Watergate and Richard Nixon. So I think those are too often too overlooked, but excellent examples of outsiders who win the presidency. Trump is an outsider, I believe, for two reasons. One, he's known for good deals, which puts him in marked contrast with Barack Obama, who's known for bad deals. The Iranian deal, the stimulus package, climate change, or global warming, is that he's known for making bad deals both here in Washington and with across the globe. The secondly is that the Republican Party has become marked by corruption, and he is in many ways the anti-Republican, anti-corruption candidate. So almost by definition, he is the outsider because he's not like Obama and he's not like the Republicans in Congress.
I got about 30 seconds left. With so many people who say that they don't like Donald Trump, and he's the wrong guy, though, but he leads in the polls. He's got a massive lead. Is there any precedence in presidential history of somebody being disliked by so many, but loved by so many others and still so far ahead?
Actually, Ed, you know, Ronald Reagan in 1980 was hated by many, and matter of fact, during his presidency, he was hated. And even as I write in my new book, is that even in the week of his death, he was hated by many people, the Republican establishment, academia, and the national media. So, you know, we have often with our presidential candidates and our presidents love-hate relationships, and in a way he's playing out history. He's not defying history.
You mentioned the book. Let's mark it once again. Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. As I pointed out, my goodness, a book on Reagan that actually has facts. What a wonderful idea. Craig Shirley, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, if it's facts you're seeking, Chicago's not the place to start. That's next, right here on The Hardline.